Welcome back. Today we are looking at transformations of functions, vertical translation, and this is part 2 of our lesson. So just a few reminders. We have f of x is equal to a times x minus h plus k. A is our scale factor. H will move our graph either left or right. Remember, think of it as a hypocrite because it does the opposite of what you see. K is our outside number, it's outside of the parentheses, and k will move the graph either up or down. And our k value we keep. Using those rules, let's go ahead and get started. We have problem 7. In the graph above, f of x is the parent function, graphed in bold, and the graph of g of x represents a transformation of the graph of f of x. Give an equation for f of x. And give an equation for g of x in terms of f of x. So here's our graph. This is f of x, and we know that f of x is an absolute value function, and the equation of an absolute value function in regards to its parent function is f of x equals the absolute value of x. So for part A, the equation of f of x is f of x equals the absolute value of x. Now we have g of x, which is the translation. We know that the graph translated 5 units down. In other words, we know that the graph moved 5 units down. With that in mind, the equation of g of x is g of x is equal to the absolute value of x minus 5. Let's look at problem 8. In the graph above, f of x is the parent function, graphed in bold, and the graph of g of x represents a transformation of the graph of f of x. Determine which type of function f of x is and give its equation. Well, f of x is a half curve, and we know that half curves are square root functions. So f of x equals the square root of x. Let's answer part A. Determine which type of function f of x is and give its equation. Okay, we did that. So once again, it's a half curve, so it's a square root function. And the equation is f of x equals the square root of x. In part B, it says, write a sentence to describe the transformation from the graph of f of x to the graph of g of x. This is g of x. From f of x to g of x, it looks like the graph moved 5 units down. So in part B, our sentence is going to be, the transformation from f of x to g of x is that the graph moved 5 units down. It's a translation of 5 units down. Let's move on. Number 9. Given f of x equals the absolute value of x and g of x is equal to f of x plus 2, write the equation of g of x in terms of x. We have g of x is equal to f of x plus 2. We know that f of x is equal to the absolute value of x, so we're just going to replace f of x with the absolute value of x. G of x is equal to the absolute value of x plus 2. And that's our answer. Let's take this a step further. I know that g of x is going to be an absolute value function, which will look like a v, and I know that the graph will move 2 units up. So it'll look something like this. We start off at 0, and from 0 we're going to move 2 units up. And remember, the graph looks like a V. And that's g of x. Now let's look at problem 10. If f of x equals x squared and g of x equals x squared plus 5, write a sentence describing the transformation that maps the parent function f of x to g of x. If we compare the two functions, notice how g of x has the plus 5. That means that the graph will move 5 units up. So in other words, The transformation that maps f of x to g of x is a translation of 5 units up. So this concludes our lesson. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe.